Hello, everybody, and this is a conversation between David Long and myself about integral life practice and developing an integral life practice. And the stream seems to be working fine, which is great. It's completely live stream, somewhat ad hoc conversation, really, because there's no pre-emptied questions here. However, we will do some sort of writing from the title here. And I'm going to switch it over to David Long with the first question, which is, what is an integral life practice to you, my brother?
Well, first, let me say what's up to the interwebs. Hope y'all are doing well today. Okay, yeah, let's see. The question is, what's an integral life practice to me? Okay, well, I've actually kind of developed my own sort of more codified kind of integral life practice that I've been working on. Eventually, I'd even like to put out an app about it, but I have some money to raise and some work to do on the front of that. But I can tell you that to me, you know, it has a few elements. So one of them is a project board, which like has all my big picture projects on and all the things I'm working on. And I have a lot of projects. So this is like to me, like to some extent, like the jewel or the goal of all the things that I'm working on, like they come out in these projects, right? So that's like the main output. And so then there's budget stuff, which is more like input, right? And so you have to have that as an element, I think. And then I have a to-do list and a calendar, right? So these are also elements of having your stuff together, the things that you need to do today to achieve your goals, as well as like events like this, have to go on the calendar. So that way, but I think one of the main pieces to this integral life practice is what I call everyday lines. And this is different than like the to-do list and the project stuff. It's like the things that you have to do every day to be able to be the person that you want to be. Right. So then I have this broken into body lines, social lines, and mental lines. And this is very much based on the Integral Life Practice book. They have these different graphs in there with modules that show like these kinds of different lines, and they encourage you to sort of touch in with them every day. Now, for me, I'm kind of, I think spirit was another one of their lines, but I think that there can be spiritual practices in all of these lines, right? So I kind of just include them in the body lines, the mental lines, and the social lines. I mean, all of, if you're really a mystic or a spiritual person, or like really in touch with your spiritual practice, all of life is kind of like a yoga at that point. All of life becomes like a spiritual practice. You want to honor it and treat it with that kind of seriousness. So everyday lines, like body lines, for example, are stuff like, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, and did you brush your teeth and do you work out and all that kind of stuff, right? Social lines are like a relationship is a line. So that's one way to think about it. Like you want your girlfriend to have a line on there where that at least every week you're spending like a good day with your lady or your girlfriend or your kids or our line or whatever it might be. And you might want to like, put that in there and really keep track of that. But there's other things, like you got to go to work. You got to like maybe do chores around the house. I would count that as a social line. And then mental lines are things like, I would put meditation under there. I put practice guitar under there. I put like, I also have what's called ins and outs, which is like information and entertainment. And one of my goals is to try and keep track of these things. Think about how much time I spend taking in information as opposed to watching entertainment and stuff like that. And so what you kind of find is, as you start to keep track of these things, is that it's really almost impossible to do all of it every week. You're lucky if you touch in with every line once a week, really, you know. I mean, that's not, I mean, of course, there are some things, you know, like you want to brush your teeth every day. But at the same time, like, if you tried to do all the things that you want to do every day in one day, it would be pretty much impossible, unless you have that whole day off or something like that. So these are the things that the more you keep track of these things, the more you get a realistic idea of what your patterns are, the things that you neglect, the things that you spend a lot of time on, and you start to get some kind of an idea about how to recalibrate and rebalance your life. I would say that there's other things too, you know, like how we engage with other people as part of a daily life practice. You know, and we talked a little bit about that last time, you know, translation versus transformation. So you could say that is a part of it. But I guess when I think integral life practice, I think like the ingredients to having your life organized more than like the spiritual practice stuff, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I'd say it's if anything, integral life practice is addressing and looking to integrate all aspects of life, however seemingly unimportant they might look to other people. An example being thinking of some sort of extreme businessman who is just all about making money, closing deals. And the question is like, why should that businessman sometimes sit down and play guitar for an hour? And the answer to that is because that's really good for your overall cognition, as well as your emotions, as well as just generally being a more rounded human being. Not
Right.
to talk about social intelligence and being able to connect and interact with people, not just around money and sort of oppress them into deals, but just being able to connect because we're all human and, you know, humans matter.
Yeah.
I personally found it to be the case that becoming aware of oneself, becoming conscious, becoming almost to say consciously conscious, okay, of everything that I do, it makes me able to consider the effect of my actions. And example being, you know, you're talking about a girlfriend or looking after your partner or whatever. It's like, you know, if I make my wife a tea, when they say the butterfly effect, like I make my wife a tea, I might get a whole hour's worth of goodness returned back of that, right? And there was like, it was a 3-minute tea. So, you know, that butterfly effect certainly does happen. So
Yeah.
what can you do if you compound all these little good things that you can do with everything and everyone? It just really comes back at you in multiples, and often the time many multiples, not just twice as much, but 10 times as much, whatever. So,
Yeah.
so that, and then it's like being cognizant and being conscious of what can I do in terms of my speaking, in terms of my songwriting, in terms of my advice that I'm giving other people, in terms of connections. You know, it's like nobody's talking to me at the moment, for example. I'm going to go and send 7 positive messages to people that I haven't chatted to before and just go, hey, I really appreciate what you've done for me there, or just I really wish you a happy Thursday or whatever, that kind of stuff. And they're like, oh, really respect that and appreciate it. It's like, it costs nothing, but it really kind of kicks you up into that positive cycle. So like one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I sort of hinted at in the previous chat we had, but I wanted to have a little bit more comprehensive insight into like how you came to realization that something like integral theory or this whole idea of integration is something that you needed, and what sort of how did that kick off, right? What brought you to that realization? Because there's a bit of like chat on the interwebs around, you know, it takes suffering to wake up, or it takes concentrated effort, or it's a random thing, right? And or it's all of the above, a mixture of those things. So, you know, tell us just about your cocktail of events that brought you to Integral, and you know, yeah.
That's interesting. I think for me, it's hard to know where to start with that, because it really does go all the way back to, like, you know, my parents, you know, and the way that they raised me and the things that they told me, and my, you know, childhood traumas and all that kind of stuff. Like, my dad is kind of like a con man, salesman type of dude, right? So, and then in my childhood, you know, because of that, and along with like Christianity and stuff like that, there was a major emphasis on truth in my life. You know, my mom would say things to me like, you know, just tell me the truth, and like, as long as we are honest with each other, you know, we'll be able to deal with whatever comes up. Just be real with me and tell me what's really going on. So, like, I think, you know, all of these things together kind of made the perfect cocktail. So, like, when I got a little bit older and I kind of grew out of Christianity, I think that there was a lot of things that were embedded in me through Christianity that I thought were worth pursuing. You know, like, there was a lot of good things about it, and it was definitely, probably for like a lot of people, comfortable to feel like you understand what's going on, and that you have, like, you know, when you lose your faith like that, really the rug gets pulled out from under you, right? And so, as a person who was always very passionate about trying to understand what's going on and wants to be good and wants to help and all that, like, I think that combined with the truth stuff and the salesman stuff, like, it just kind of sent me down this path of like being really concerned with trying to figure out what was true and what was actually going on. And I was also never one of those kinds of Christians who pays lip service to it and like wasn't really serious about it. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't just like, yeah, I go to church on Sunday and like, then I just go back to work and do my thing. You know, I was like a seriously committed Christian, and I went to church a lot, like probably 3 or 4 times a week or something like that. You know, I've read the Bible a bunch.
Wow.
Like, I've read the Bible straight through 6 times. That's not even counting like audio stuff or like the years growing up at church. So like, I was serious. And so I'm still serious, and I still care about what's true, and I still love God, and I still want to, you know, be a vehicle for service in that way. I still want to be able to be in touch with what's good and true, and live a good life. And so I don't think that ever changed. I think that just my ideas about how to do that evolved. And, you know, I also found a lot of things on the way that kind of like set me up very nicely for an integral perspective. My friend Kevin was a very big influence on me. He would draw me all kinds of graphs and stuff, and I think he originally drew me like the first version of something like quadrants that I had seen. It was a little bit different, and the structure of it was more loose, so you could apply it to a lot of different things, kind of like we do with quadrants. But basically, it was almost like Ken Wilber took this tool that I already had and applied it to metaphysics, and that's the quadrants. So I already had that tool, and I already had, like, you know, some of these understandings of development through other ways of talking about it, like chakras, and I kind of had some like vague intuitions about some of this stuff. And then Joseph Campbell, when I found out about his approach to comparative mythology, to me, like, that is the integral approach, is that you put all the world's traditions on the table, you look for the overarching patterns and similarities, and that probably tells us something about you know, human psychology in general, and then you look at each one of the cultural inflections, and that probably tells you something about that culture. So you start to have the tools online as well as the values and the drives to be able to get up into this worldview. And then, you know, through Buddhism, I found Andrew Cohen, and through Andrew Cohen, I found Ken Wilber. And just at the time when I thought I was ready to take my ideas into the world, I had to go back into the cave to spend a longer time to reassimilate integral theory. And so I spent a long time doing that.
So when you say through Buddhism, are you actually a practicing Buddhist, or you know, have embraced Buddhism in some way, shape, or form in a kind of more sense than just kind of, oh, I appreciate its teachings and sort of take out of it things that are practical? Or are you actually more practicing Buddhist?
I wouldn't say that I'm like, I'm more of like a dabbler. What I mean by that is like, I mean, especially influenced by Joseph Campbell. He really taught me that all of these traditions are kind of like poetic languages, right? So I almost see myself as like more like multilingual. You know, like I can speak Christian, and yeah, I believe that when I'm speaking Christian, I believe that, you know, what I'm saying is true in the context of those symbols. I would say that I'm just as Christian as I am Buddhist, as I am pagan. You know, I think that they can all be true, and they all harmonize with each other if you don't take any of them literally.
So on that note, and this is complete stream of consciousness. So I'm asking you as
I'm
you're
a long
speaking.
time meditator too, so that you know, not just like I like the ideas of Buddhism, but I also practice. So that'd be
one thing I've found, because I know you talk about like pre-trans and post-trans fallacies and all these kind of things a lot, and it's like one of the things that I've experimented a little bit with is practicing a little bit of mythic literalism with people. When I notice that someone's mythic literal and they literally believe a holy scripture, I'll go like, yeah, that's true, you're right, and you know, see what kind of conversation I can have. Have you ever tried something like that?
A little bit. I would say that I only do it to the extent to which I'm going to be figuring out a way to translate with them. In general, I don't want to encourage people in their superstitious ideas. I think that, I guess I almost see every time that I'm with a person as a potential opportunity to have an impact on them. And so, this isn't to say that I'm like hugely focused on transformation necessarily, but I am interested in how I can give people upgrades, or how I can, I mean, and that can be within the tradition too. You know, that's more the translation style. So I will a little bit play along, but usually within the playing along, I'm also questioning, what about this? Or encouraging, and I think we should be doing this because we care about God, or something like that. But yeah, I mean, like, so I will agree to some extent just to be able to enter into the conversation with them, to kind of like push out into their worldview a little bit, and try to engage with them. I don't think it's, in general, I don't think it's skillful to set yourself up in opposition to a person, especially right in the beginning. So, but on the other hand, if you tell people, if they're going to actually spend time getting to know you, and then they find out that you've misrepresented yourself in some way, you can lose credibility with that. You know what I mean?
But so that's the thing. That's, I think, the nuance where, you know, if let's say you're saying, and I've practiced this a little bit, where I would say to people, I'm Muslim and Christian and Buddhist and Sikh and Jewish, right? Just to also see how they respond to that. But like, if you say you're Muslim or Christian, then to some extent, one of the interpretations in integral theory could be that you can hold any one of these sets of beliefs on, let's say, Islam, you know, so you could hold, at least notionally, the view of instinctive Islam, magical Islam, power Islam, rule Islam, rational Islam, sensitive Islam, integral and holistic Islam, right? So
Sure.
to me, in some sense, like a holistic Islam is one where I'm Muslim, but I'm also Christian, Jewish, and all these other things.
Right. Because at that point, it's what it Muslim is like. It's a language. It's more than it is like an identity that you're stuck with or something like that. There's truths in the language. If you speak in those symbol sets, there's value to be found if you know how to find it. And yeah, and those values from different traditions are not necessarily mutually exclusive and contradictory in the ways that their claims are. Like if you take them literally, then you're definitely getting into the realm of contradictions. But if you read them poetically, I mean, like if we wanted to say, like, you know, jihad really is about like a spiritual warfare, you know what I mean? And you could say that spirit, like a jihad or something like that, is like a kind of like a way of talking about karma yoga or something like that. This kind of life practice of engaging in spiritual practice and spiritual warfare in the world, you know?
So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and this was one of the questions that was semi-formed in my head, was that, so I didn't know this thing about that you were coming from effectively Christianity into this, and quite heavy practice. But so, you know, not mentioning any names of people here, but, you know, integral theory says, you know, you can come to the top of the mountain, so to speak, via different paths, whether that's through emotional intelligence or social intelligence or spiritual intelligence and all these kind of things, lines of development.
Yeah.
And so
I would say it depends on what you think the top of the mountain is. But
okay, so there's two questions here. One is, how does one know when they're top of the mountain, and is there such a thing? Let's just start with that. How does one know, okay, I'm self-actualized?
I guess I would say that one of the problems that I think around religion is to act like all the religions are taking you to the top of the same mountain. I don't think that's true. I think what Buddhism is trying to do is different than what Christianity is trying to do, is different than what paganism is trying to do. I think there are maybe corresponding peaks, you know what I mean? But I almost don't like the idea of there being one mountain, or if it is one mountain, maybe there's multiple peaks on this mountain, and some traditions are better at getting you to that peak than others. And there might be a universal peak where they all could get you to this one peak, but that might not necessarily be everything. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Okay, let's just ask a straightforward question. What does it mean to be self-actualized to you?
Self-actualized to me.
Or even, is there such a concept in integral theory to you and your interpretation? Because I'm thinking that there is. In many respects, I drew up this logo, right, of Integral as a company here, and it's like there's an element of sort of self-actualization. When I drew this up, I drew it up as like, it was just like a nice symbol. But then, you know, as I thought about it, it was like, yeah, there is a sort of a you know, focus point of some sort. And
well, there's a developmental Pinnacle, I think, you know what I mean? I'm just saying, I don't know if I would conflate the developmental pinnacle with what with the religious language games. I think they might help you get there to some extent, but they can be as confusing and as much of a block to that as they can be a pathway to it, I think.
I didn't mean it in terms of religions. It's just like, you know, put religions on the side.
Okay,
it's just in terms of like developing integral life practice. Let's say, you know, the spiral dynamics is the middle point of that sort of focus point in the map, and you go like, well, I wouldn't be on top, you know. Like, we've spoken to a lot of people through the Fresh Mind program that we coach them through, and the people are like, I want that eternal blissfulness, flow state, you know, joy, enlightenment, reverence, all those kind of things. A lot of those words are used in religions, right? But a lot of the time people just kind of listen to it, maybe in the church, and they're kind of like dozing off, like reverence, whatever it is. I don't know what that means.
See, if we're talking like, I guess, like, you know, the highest point in the pinnacle, or, you know, the pinnacle of self-development, or something like, if we would want to call it something like self-actualization, to me, I probably wouldn't use any of those words to describe it. I would say it would be something like a skillful epistemology, or having like a good understanding of the strengths and limits of your own knowledge, you know, like understanding your own strengths and limits, I would say. Of course, you know, at the highest levels, we've also our strengths quite a bit. You know what I mean? So it's like we're coming up to, like, I would say, the top of our ability to be able to, I guess I'm saying at the highest level of cognition, there's like good sorting that happens, a way of processing data and figuring out what to do with it. So I don't know if it gets better than that. I don't know, like.
Whenever I hear I don't know, right, to me it's like, you don't know, who knows, right? Like, you know, do I know?
Well, a lot of people are feeling like amazing bliss and feelings and stuff like that, but those are like temporary states that come and go, not necessarily like structures. I mean, like, and I don't think that, like, you know, that idea of hurts more, bothers you less, right? So it's like when you're a really enlightened being that's, you know, fully in touch with the world and in love with reality and wanting to do your best, it can hurt a lot because there's so much suffering in the world and there's so much problems and struggle. And when you really care about all these people and you have the tools to be able to help them, like, this to me, like, brings a big tension. Like, I have this, like, I could help you. I could help make it better. So, I mean, I feel like there's a heaviness, a weight of the world on one's shoulders that comes along with this. If you are really in touch with your responsibility and the possibilities that you have to be able to help people and the world around these kinds of things. So to me, you know, I like the way that Andrew Cohen talks about it sometimes as like this kind of creative, ecstatic urgency or something, like I must, like, I don't know, like, I guess I experience it in that kind of a way where it's like, it doesn't feel necessarily like bliss. It feels more like urgency. And in kind of a non-personal way, like, it's like, this is what needs to be done. I need to get out of the way and of myself to be able to do it.
Okay, so let me describe what I've got to. Okay, and you know, I would maybe resonate with you this time last year, but since doing Fresh Mind, I've come to this realization or way of being, which is that now that I have a very, very clear life purpose, that is connected to my being. And there's
Yeah.
this idea that, you know, people write down like, oh, my life purpose is to help billion people, which is kind of what I defined last year. And then like people just kind of taking the mic as like, how many people have you helped so far? And it's like, how do you even quantify that and all that stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I want to do that, but it wasn't really connecting with who I am. And then so now with the new purpose that's even bigger, which is around redesigning humanity, that is one of the subtopics. But the way I'm living my life is that every single second that I spend living and breathing, I am putting little bits and things together to realize that purpose. So it's almost like extreme urgency to the point where every word, every movement, every thought, every blink of an eye is about realizing that purpose, but in a complete flex flow state, which is the level 7, you know, integral way of being, thinking, and having. And
of course you want to find,
and therefore that's the woo way, that's the effortless mastery. Because you then say, well, actually, I was wanting to build this web page and it's not compiling, or I can't think it through. Instead of that, I'm going to put that down for half an hour and I'm going to write a song on my piano, but it's on purpose. And as I write that song, my subconscious mind is going to churn through the problem. And when I come back to the web page, I'm going like, oh yeah, it was obvious what the issue was, and now I can fix that. But so I haven't spent half an hour kind of just bashing the computer. I've spent half an hour producing a piece of music that may go into an intro for this podcast or whatever that we'll repurpose out of these videos. And then I've come back and gone, okay, so I'm juggling these lines of development and living that integral life without having to, you know, beat myself on the head.
Yeah, I think that's actually, that's where it's at, you know, like, and I have to think about this stuff all the time too, because I have a huge project board full of things. And so what am I going to work on? You know? So yeah, figuring out
everything.
Yeah, everything. But at the same time, you want to go where the passion is, because that's where it's going to be. I mean, you have to prioritize as well, obviously. But if you're really feeling like now's a time when you want to be making some music, you know, then yeah, maybe now's the time to capture that. Because a lot of, I think, especially around art, what you're doing is like, and I noticed this especially with my songs, they're very state dependent. You know what I mean? Like you have to be in the right frame of mind to be able to create something. And it's weird because like I'll work on songs over a long time, you know, and it's like I'll make the music on this day, and then I'll come back and I'll do like a verse and a chorus on this day, and then I'll come back and do another verse like later, like, you know, months later. And it really does have different energies, you know, like whatever I have going at the time comes in, you know. And it's like you kind of, as like an actor or something, you almost have to allow it, you know, to be there.
Yeah.
So I really like that you're bringing it back around to this idea of the integral life practice and where to put your time and stuff. I guess, you know, there's so many people who think of enlightenment and, you know, the highest levels beings as just like being these like blissed out, perpetually smiling, you know, like life is all rainbows and roses kind of a thing. And I guess like I'm sort of pushing back against that. You know, I think that at the highest levels, of course, you know, if I was to the point in my own life where I felt like I was really comfortably in my work and it was happening and it was just unflowing, you know, like effortlessly, and it's all happening, then maybe it would be easier for me to relax into it a little bit. But, you know, I'm struggling. So maybe it's you know, it's a little bit personal too, you know, like it's it's easier for me to resonate with the struggle than it is for me to resonate with this idea that I'm like that it's like the ultimate goal is just to be in bliss or something like that.
Okay, so feedback on that, or my perspective on that, which is that I've spent, like, my wife and I both spent like war in Bosnia 3 years. Before that it was like Yugoslavia, socialist country. It was like, don't think about businesses. People not supposed to have big money. You can have a house and a job and free healthcare and free schooling, which is amazing actually in itself. But it's like, don't think bigger than that. And actually in that system, people lived quite blissfully. So kind of, it was sort of possible then. But then the war in Bosnia broke out, all this kind of stuff. So struggle. And so we learned how to thrive in struggle. Okay. But as soon as we got to a relative state of, well, not relative, but like a state of having, okay, then it was like, oh, I have kind of everything that I could have imagined before for the I quadrant. Yeah. And then it's like, then you sort of start stepping into the we and it's more, right? And you're like, but I want to still further progress. And so what I'd realized is that we didn't learn how to operate effectively, how to thrive from bliss. So therefore the mind ends up looking for struggle to thrive. And in that looking for struggle, you tend to pull yourself down to find the struggle. And then you're like, now I've got to get out of this. As opposed to being in the bliss state, that is the new foundation. I use the mirror. I'm standing in front of the mirror for a reason, because it's like a, mirror on yourself. But, you find the state of bliss as the foundation from which you can perfectly operate. You can operate from struggle. You've learned that. You're like a master of operation from struggle. It's no problem. It's in the bag. But it's like, how do you operate from bliss to go to this, the future?
Yeah.
And that's the skill to develop. And I feel like I've stepped into that. So it is possible. Yeah. And it's somewhat, the idea, it's like you have to come to the terms that there's a gestation period. So if you're going to write a song, it's not just you don't blink and it writes itself. Even if you're like whatever, Tupac or whoever, Eminem, right? You're still going to have to sit there and for 5 minutes write it out. So there's like, maybe as Eminem might have 5-minute gestation period, but then he's got really high quality standards. So it's like, well, I'm still spending 3 weeks making one song, right? But my quality standard is really high versus somebody else who spent 3 weeks and make a really crappy song. So you got to bear with that gestation period, but you don't have to see it as struggle. You can see it as life and blissfulness. Okay.
Yeah.
And as you frame it in your mind that way, you actually find that you can then get consistently better and better and better without having to suffer.
Yeah. I think my concern around some of these things is that there tends to be a pattern around, especially around a spiritual practice, about avoidance. The idea of spiritual bypassing, like ignoring your problems and stuff like that, and being like, well, I just feel good. You know what I mean? And I think this is what happens at the more like green freshman kind of spiritual stuff, where it tends to be kind of like focus on the positive, avoid the negative kind of stuff. I kind of like, I guess the way I like to talk about it is being able to maintain a level of peace in the struggle. I still think it's good to be motivated by struggle. And I think I don't think it's necessarily realistic or helpful to tell people who are in the struggle to just bypass it and go to and like find peace. You know what I mean? So I do think that there has to be a dealing with the condition. That's responsibility.
It's what I've found is more that people have fear, obviously up to level 6, stage 6, and so on. And even at, you know, integral level, there's kind of remnants of fear. And so what actually happens is you'll end up having people saying, I don't want lots of money, la la la, because yeah, I don't need that, la la. But that's all just kind of like ego defending itself at lower levels, because
Right.
what they're really fearful is they fear success, because they don't know what they would do when they enter that sort of blissful state. Okay,
Right.
because they've trained themselves very well to operate from the struggle. So it's not about saying to people, you know, don't operate well from struggle, or don't, like, I mean, why would you ever say to people to not stop struggling, right? Just like work your ass off to get out of the struggle, of course. But it's a really the concept of mental struggle versus physical struggle. And, you know, I wouldn't want anyone in the world to be dying of hunger, right? But then a lot of sort of depression is self-inflicted thing, because you're just like, oh, I haven't got the boat like my next door neighbor. It's like, dude, just like embrace the fact that you're still doing really well, you know, but then work towards maybe having a boat if that's your thing, or think actually, you know, what else could that boat be in terms of helping a whole bunch of people in the we quadrant, right? So it's really that sort of thing. But people actually fear success quite a lot. It's interesting thing, because I think that's to them a big unknown. I don't know what I would do if I had millions. Don't know what to do with them. It's an unknown. Fear of unknown, literally.
Yeah.
And that's something that can be like a huge blind spot to very good people. Very good people. That's what I found out, including myself. Where it's like, I don't need big money. And it's like, actually, you're limiting yourself, because maybe I don't need it as an I in the I quadrant, but we need a lot of money. Because if I think of myself as the integral community, then we can say like, hey, I could be funding you to be building better maps for everyone else to use and self-develop. So it's a very, actually, if you think about it, it's a very selfish thing. It's a very egotistical thing. Like, I don't need big money.
Right.
It's
like who are you living for?
Exactly.
Are you living for you, or are you living for what you can do?
Yeah. So it goes back to what you were saying earlier on, which is like, you know, we you know, so that's where I hear this thing around struggle. Yeah. And it's like, don't you see there's lots of struggle around the world? It's like, yeah, I do see it. But I also see that I got to stop struggling first, because it kind of starts from I, yeah? So I got to stop struggling first and looking for struggle. I got to learn how to operate from solution space, which is, let's say, bliss, okay, problem space levels 4 and below, solution space level 5 and above, let's say. And when I learn how to do that as a regular, if not 100%, then 80+% of my thinking and being, doing, and having, then I can actually start projecting onto the we, it, and its space in terms of solutionizing in an empathetic way, not in an egotistical way. That's the idea here. But correct me if I'm wrong.
But don't you feel like grounding yourself in bliss is just like, because I would say that's a state. You know, states come and go. They're like the weather. I wouldn't expect that. You know, I guess I'm saying I don't think that that what it means to be an enlightened person is that you're always happy, or that problems stop. I'm saying there's still going to be problems. You're still going to have bad days. Things are still going to break your heart. The struggles of the world are still going to, you know, probably weigh heavy on you if you think that you can do something for it. I mean, I guess I don't think it's good to wallow in struggle or self-pity, but I also don't think it's good to spiritually bypass and like, you know, force yourself into some kind of a positive space where you have negative ideas about the negative stuff, because you're not going to be able to work on those things in a progressive way if you've like been like, no, I can't feel that. If if I step out of my bliss state, that means I'm immature or I'm not enlightened. And I don't think that's the case, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, so bliss, I think this is maybe a misunderstanding of what bliss is, right? Bliss is like saying, shit, I'm deep in debt, but I breathe, okay? Therefore, I'm going to deal with my debt while enjoying my breath, not ignore the debt, yeah?
Right.
It's like saying, I'm loving my breath and I'm operating from peace, reverence, and enlightenment because I'm breathing,
yeah.
But I'm dealing with my debt because it's my duty and my responsibility to deal with that. So it's nothing to do with bypassing. It's about finding pivots around which you can hang on to, strong points in yourself, to then deal with other crap that you got to clear out, or grow up on, or wake up around. So it's like some sort of a climber, you know. It's like your inner frame is missing parts, right? But you can climb around to get up and then go, shit, like from up above I can see, oh, I gotta clear that down, so I'm gonna go down into the spiral, right, and clear that mess there, because my roof of the house is going to be better, you know, founded, and so on. So it's really, I guess it's really hard.
I hear you saying, like, I like the way you put that, how you said that, like, the struggle exists, or the issues exist, they're out there, but you want to kind of use your own strengths and your own things that you've developed as kind of axioms or push-off points to be able to get in there and deal with it. And, you know, I think, you know, maybe there's a little bit of semantic confusion in between your perspective and mine, but I think we're mostly like honing in on the same kind of idea around this idea of finding this kind of balance point within yourself. Because I think it's you know, when you are maybe more of a emergentist or a kind of materialist, like if you think that this is it, right, then it's impermanence. It's the fact that things don't last that makes everything special, right? So even though there's a kind of, I'll say it again, it's impermanence. It's the fact that things don't last that make them special. Like the reason that this is a special moment right now is because it's going to end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like part of, I think there's got to be a part of it, you know, like, or an underlying kind of rootedness in this understanding of an appreciation for life, you know, an appreciation for the amazingness that it is to even be here and to be a part of this. Like, I totally think that it's worth risking pain and death and suffering for love, to be able to have these kinds of connections with other people and to be able to be here. Like, I think this is the best possible reality. Like, this is the best possible situation, is to be in this place where there are problems to work on. There is something to do. And we're not just alone. We have other people to share it with and to motivate us. And I mean, if you step far enough back, you know, the horror is just the foreground of the wonder. And so maybe that's what you're talking about too, is like getting in touch with this, being deeply in touch with the amazingness, the wonder of life, and being there first, being grounded in that. And then from there also being like, and yeah, we have to figure out how we're going to pay our bills. And, and yeah, this over here is a problem. But aren't we so grateful for the fact that we have problems and that we get to be here and that we get to be engaged in this whole thing? It's beautiful, even though it hurts like hell sometimes.
So, okay, so there's a couple of things I want to, this is turning into almost like a Sam Harris versus Jordan Peterson on a higher level kind of conversation, I suppose.
Which one am I?
I think you're Sam Harris.
Okay, I like the name Harris. If I had to pick
Okay.
one.
But for me, it's what I'm saying is, so you said nothing is permanent. Having said that, it's like transcendence. There's a concept of transcendence here, obviously, which is kind of baked into the whole spiral dynamics, blah blah blah. But let's say it took me originally to instigate this conversation. It took you and I, to have the conversation. This Hangouts and YouTube is enabling us to put it into the its realm forever, for as long as there is internet. And then this is being beamed up into the alien space of cosmos. Some aliens are listening to this, the flying orbs or whatever. And so actually this is, I see it as eternal conversation. Aliens are listening to this on that full holistic realm. And yeah, it sounds mystical and mythical, maybe even, and archetypal and cosmological or whatever, but that's how I see it. And then so really it's about leaving that legacy and living the life, like, Robert Anthony says, we all have to die, and before that we all have to live. So then the question, what kind of life do we want to live? And the life, to me, is the life of leaving as much of that legacy behind that impacts on the we, it, and its spaces. Yeah. When I transcend into the next dimension or whatever, I choose to, believe that there is never-ending life, and that, my being is going to go, like when, like Alan Watts says, that death is an absolute joke. It's the ultimate joke. It's like you die and then you actually self-actualized. That was it. So it's that sort of thing. So and then maybe bliss is realization of this, that actually maybe, as we're having this conversation, we're not recognizing the fact that our conversation may only impact the world in 3, 4, 5, 10 years time, right? Yeah. That we're 10 years ahead of the society, and this talk, majority of the society doesn't understand, but in 10 years time they'll be like, oh, these guys were like the pioneers of thinking right, not positive or negative, thinking right. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm very tempted to become Sam Harris a little bit right now.
Go for it.
Okay, if I was channeling Sam Harris, I think that he would say that part of the problem with thinking that you're going to be able to go on to some other thing is that it keeps you from really appreciating and being responsible in this life. I think that's a valid criticism. I've definitely heard him make that one. So let me see if I can unpack that a little bit.
Please.
I do think that life goes on, the universe continues. And, if Sam Harris also is a longtime meditator, and he also thinks that self is an illusion, right? Self is a concept in the mind. He doesn't believe that self is the real thing. That's little s self, by the way.
Little s self. What do you think? This is an important thing now to think about. Is there a concept of capital S self in your view?
Yes. So this is where I'm going with this. So in the way I think you're right is that life continues on. So I think part of what it means to be enlightened is to realize that you are the universe in flux. You're just a drop in this ocean. So, I think Eckhart Tolle or something like that. He said something, again, in the Buddhist tradition, like what dies? Names and concepts and illusions, right? Like the mythology of David in accordance with this body, you know what I mean? Like that's going to come to an end. But being itself, big capital S self, continues. And if you re-identify with that self and live from that perspective, like I am the universe as David in time working. Oh, someone's home. Hi. The good things about the mirror, huh?
Yeah, Ernie. That's my son, Ernie, who just knows answers to every question instantly. We're live streamed to YouTube.
How you doing, Ernie?
Say something profound.
If you feel sad or disappointed, you don't. It's just a label.
There you go. If you feel sad or disappointed, it's just a label you're putting on yourself.
Yeah, that's interesting too. How we say I'm sad or I'm angry, and then we become it and act it out. Yeah, he's a smart kid.
It's like that's a statement of truth. You are whatever you think you are. And yeah, that's sort of,
or you act out whatever you think you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're always doing your best.
Yeah. So I guess I'm saying, going back to what we were talking about, I'm saying I think to some extent the idea that you get more than just what there is here, I think can block us from really appreciating what it is we have here, the limited time that we get, and to really understand like the real limits of it. And
Okay.
I honestly think that there's no good reason to think there's anything after, but at least not for David, you know. I don't, and like a lot of these kinds of ideas, like I don't know, when you start thinking about them logically, I feel like they kind of just like they fall apart, especially in the light of, I don't know, it's hard to figure out exactly how to balance and qualify a lot of these ideas, because, you know, like I was saying, you know, like on one hand, I identify with what Sam Harris is saying over here, you know, about how there is no self. And then over here, you know, like, oops, I'm good with like the Buddhist language of there is an ultimate big picture self that we're all a part of and that we're all connected. And so I do think that those language games can harmonize, but the trick is to get them to harmonize in some kind of a skillful way that also cashes out in accord with the way that reality actually works. That's where a good epistemology comes in. Going back to one of
the statements from psychology that's always quite interesting to me is the idea that you're not what you think you are, but what you think you are. And so it's like what that bakes in is a multi-perspectival view on things. And I think this is also very important for the integral life practice. And I'm writing an article about this entitled Perspective Juggling versus Perspective Integration or Synthesis, right? The idea that like I can go like, oh, I can see things from, to go to like Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, I can see things from the right Republican point of view and from the Antifa leftist point of view, right? But it's like, can you see it from both at the same time?
Right.
And,
exactly.
And so, so when we're talking about, you know, integral, we're thinking either up or down or in and out kind of thinking. And so the question is, can you hold a meta perspective at the same time as your own physical perspective, or even multiple perspectives in this sort of observable realm, with a unified meta realm perspective, and synthesize all of that at the same time and go, okay, well, David, I want the best for David. It's like who was saying the other day on Facebook, they posted, we're all perfect beings marionetting a mental patient, right? Controlling a mental patient. So to some extent, that sort of Pinocchio thing makes sense, right?
Although I think the problem with that metaphor is around the idea of perfect beings, right? Because from this big picture perspective, I mean, this is why like a lot of the green people who are like, it's all love and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, but if we're talking about this absolute unity that has all kinds of love for itself, the same thing that you're calling love is also selfishness, because there's only one thing and it loves itself. So to talk about love or perfection in that context is confusing, because you're applying values, relative values, in an absolute space, right? So like in an absolute sense, we might say in an absolute sense, everything is perfect, like the process is working perfectly or something like that. I don't know.
Okay. So we actually have a model through which we work, and we use these as what we call clearing keywords, and we've mapped them out to spiral dynamics. So I'll say, like, in the instinctive realm, we clear people for things like shame, guilt, and misery. On the magical realm, we clear people for regret, withdrawal, and disappointment. On the power realm, we clear people for anxiety, fear, and anger. On the rule-role realm, we clear people for resentment, indifference, and pride. Okay, and then that's the kind of end of the clearing sort of levels. But then it goes into perfection levels, and perfection being a very key word here, because the idea that like self-actualized human is a person who recognizes the perfection of their being, the higher self, okay, capital S.
And when you say perfection in this regard, you're saying it like as a verb, like perfection as like we're working on our perfection, not as a realization, like we're going to achieve perfection. Right?
We are talking about it as like a super state, okay, self-recognition of one own self's perfection on the being level. And this is again something that comes from psychology, that like someone like Robert Anthony say, on the being level you're already perfect. Yeah, and that's like a given. Now you might see this as a sort of, oh, it's like a hoo-ha, woo, whatever. But that's what he says. He's like a psychologist, a doctor of psychology. And it's like, I don't know like how they can make those claims. Maybe that's just a sort of like a personal thing.
It's not that I'm saying that I guess I'm just saying that in this regard, perfect makes sense as like the ultimate achievement in the relative dimensions. But to talk about perfection in terms of the absolute is to apply relative standards to the absolute. And that's why it gets a little bit confusing, because you could say it's just as perfect as it just is without any value distinctions. You know what I mean?
So check this out. So so now we're going into perfection keywords, right? And level 5, the keywords are courage, willingness, and empowerment. Okay, these are like sort of the perfection keywords. Level 6 is trust, understanding, and resolution. And then level 7, the integral realm, is wisdom, love, and joy. So you're right, the love sits at 7, not 8. But 8 is peace, reverence, and enlightenment. And that then kind of gives scope for love being a neutral force, really. It's not necessarily love as in like, oh, I'm going to give you a hug,
How would you define enlightenment? Maybe this is cracking open a whole new thing, but
yeah. So enlightenment is like seeing things for what they truly are, without the things that Ernie mentioned earlier on, like putting labels on it and so on. Being able to observe in a way that is completely unbiased. And that goes back to that sort of perspective synthesis, to say, because often the time you see like somebody says, oh, I love you so much, la la la, and you've got this kind of like YouTube prank videos, right, where like a girl walk up to a guy and he's like driving a Lambo, and she's like, I love you. And then he goes, oh no, that's my car over there. And she's like, no, I don't, I'm off. Right. And it's like, you know, sometimes people say they love you, but they actually, it's like a hateful undertone to that, really. They're just doing it for themselves, the lower level self, out of selfishness. So enlightenment is kind of being able to see through that, all those labels and so on, and going like, okay, I see what you want, and that's perfectly fine. If you were able to say to me, hey, I want to ride in Lambo, can I get a ride? I'll be like, cool. So I appreciate your honesty. But it's like, oh, I love you, I think you're so cool, blah blah blah. It's like, no, you don't get a ride in Lambo, right? Because you don't need to tell me that you love me when you don't. You're just looking for your own ride, and that's fine. I would actually respect that truth on that low level much better than some lie on the quote unquote higher level.
Okay, I think we're using the word a little bit differently. You're using it in a way that I think is referring to like that kind of self-actualization, when I was talking about like kind of like reaching the pinnacle of your own kind of perspective and like the sorting capability. I think you said something about like being able to see things more as they are, you know. So when I think of enlightenment, I'm kind of thinking of it in the Eastern version of enlightenment, right? Because Western enlightenment's about like getting all the best maps. That's kind of, you know, like what you're talking about, I would say, is like almost like the pinnacle of Western enlightenment, something like that. And when I think of enlightenment as the realization of unity, right? So like in the context of Buddhism, that basically makes sense along with what their enlightenment story is, but it also kind of works with Christianity. You know, I and the Father are one. So I feel like there's ways to talk about this in a lot of different traditions. But I guess the reason I'm making this distinction is because I think this realization of unity can happen more at like green. And I guess I'm saying in this regard, I don't think enlightenment is the finished self-actualization thing. I feel like it's more like the beginning, waking up into the process of this kind of perfection that you're talking about. You know what I mean?
So this is an important thing to then make a distinction between the like. So also, side note, I don't this make a distinction between Western and Eastern. To me, that's just like sides of the world. You know, I'm talking about enlightenment here. You know, we're working with 18 lines of development, actually, like social intelligence, physical, academic, conscious, technological. We brought technological in because some people can't even connect to Google Hangouts to have a live stream on, and it's like, whoa, like there's like the inner tech notion as well. But so you can have that enlightenment, or actually just knowing. Let's say in musical, both of us are musicians. So, you know, someone like Kenny Werner talks about, you know, to enter the state of effortless mastery as a musician, you first have to come to terms that he's a pianist. So he just puts a hand on the piano like this and just makes that like sound. And he goes, if you can accept this as perfection, perfect sound, and just sit in that space comfortably, then you will really know how to appreciate everything else that you perform. So that's kind of like not labeling them, oh, something is dissonant. It's like, oh, these two notes don't go together. It's like, depends on the context, depends on, you know, what's going on. And that real appreciation of everything as music is a sort of musical enlightenment. Now, that's on the being level, but then there's the doing and having, right? So the teaching is like, on the being level, you're already perfect. What you do and have is far from perfect. And so then integral life practice on the doing and having ought to start from that peace, reverence, and enlightenment of the being, and that's your blissfulness. And you go, as a being, I feel and know what that's like, and I'm looking to do and have as close to that as I can, and that may take millions of lifetimes.
Yeah. You know, I just want to almost like meta comment on our whole conversation right now for anybody who might be kind of watching. Like what I feel like what you and I are doing right now is, I mean, we started out kind of trying to talk about integral life practice, but I think a lot of what we're trying to do just between you and I is find a common language, figure out how we can understand what the other person is talking about. And this is the good thing about having a common map in the first place. And I do think it's important to understand that there are different language games, and that what enlightenment means in the West versus what it means in the East are different and can be conflated and confused. And I do think it's important to be able to talk to somebody who's more science-minded and be able to talk about the Enlightenment project, and also to be able to talk to somebody who's more Eastern Buddhist-minded and to be able to talk to them about the Enlightenment project. I think both projects are really important, and I do think that they synthesize around this point of unity. Like, I think science and stuff like that has proven it. It's interesting, like, you know, like the kind of, I guess, conversation I would say that kind of happens around these two is that in the West, as soon as we started naming everything, right? You think like the Garden of Eden or something, right? That's a this, that's a this. So it's like in the West, this is the beginning of knowledge. In the East, this is the beginning of delusion, right? Because you're cutting yourself off from all of these things and you're creating all these boundaries, right? But then eventually science and the Enlightenment project gets to a point to where it discovers the ways in which everything is connected. And it can actually have the language to talk about that. And so they come full circle on themselves and kind of harmonize at the end around, I think, this idea of absolute unity and interconnectedness. So I think they're related but different projects. And
so this is again, you know, we're talking about the doing and having realms, you know, and it's like I've heard, you know, Don Beck talk about this is Western, you know, spiral dynamics is a Western view on things, and, you know, nothing to do with Eastern mysticism and, you know, spirituality and so on.
Well, I think in that regard, he wasn't saying that spiral dynamics is for the West. I think is what he was saying is that those mystical traditions are the product of a particular culture, and the goal is not to get everyone to become an adherent to this cultural dogma or whatever, or these ideas, but to be able to work on this Western map together, or this Enlightenment map, where we're actually rigorously trying to figure out what's actually good and true in the most non-biased way possible.
Yeah, and
I do think that's important too, because one of the main issues in our community, and this is one of the things I bring up in my What You Talking About, Wilbur video around evolutionary spirituality, is you have someone like Steve McIntosh, who basically wants to make like a Christian version of integral, and then you have someone like Ken Wilber, who wants to make kind of a Buddhist version of integral, and they both kind of want to conflate all the mountaintops into the mountaintop that they like. And this becomes really problematic, you know, like at the end of the day, we need to be able to figure out what the system is that skillfully integrates all these things, and not just try to sneak in the thing that we like, or to make it about the thing that we like.
And that's the bias thing, right? So
yeah.
It was like, you know, if I'm coming from a Muslim or Islamic culture, you know, I could be like pushing the, you know, Islam is the one religion, right? And it's like, no, that's not like, it's not, even Islam doesn't say that. Islam says, you know, respect other religions, right? So I think that's just a man bias, okay, human bias. But I think that the actual theory itself, as an integral theory,
Right.
is not just for East or West, it's for both,
Right.
because it has to span the whole globe and even the universe, right? It
Yeah.
needs to work like this everywhere.
Right. Exactly.
So if we met some sort of alien creature, it'd be like, hey, dude.
They should have their own version of it.
It's like, you know, you meet an alien and they're gray, and it's like, dude, we don't have gray under spiral dynamics. You gotta be green. All right. So just as you know, we can go on about this. Let's go towards closing off. I've got a little game for you. What I've been collecting is what I call the wisdom of all ages. Okay, which is a cool integral quotes from different people. And what I have is like a little rudimentary app here that allows me to just kind of randomly select them from the collection. And so one that is, so I'm going to ask you a question. This is an integral game. I literally devised it before we started. And there's no right or wrong answers. There just is.
They always say that, but that's, I don't know how to.
So the one that's come up is actually interesting. And so I'm going to read you the quote and you're going to comment from your perspective. So the one that's come up is by Carl Jung, our good friend. It says, whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event. Comment.
Yes. We definitely tend to project our shadow and fight it in the world. You know, and this is one of the best ways that we can start to recognize our shadow. And that's why it's such a good practice to kind of really try to extend compassion to the things that upset you, to really figure out if there is something that you're not looking at or you're avoiding. You know, another thing before we close, there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about those different body lines, social lines, and mental lines, and just like the ways that people tend to balance these things. But we can come back to that. I just wanted to kind of like put a pin in that.
Put a mental pin in that.
Yeah. So we both are aware.
So are you ready for the next one?
Let's
give you two more. Yeah. So the next one is this is by Alan Watts, our good friend. He says, you feel how you are.
You feel how you are.
You can say pass and then I'll comment on it.
Okay, pass.
Basically, your feelings are generated by yourself. They're a product of thought first. So you think, and then that induces feelings into your body. And then you can experience feeling and think, where's this feeling coming from? Oh, so-and-so made me feel like this. And so all you're doing is you're making yourself feel that way. And yourself generates that feeling. Okay.
Right.
So
small
it
s self.
Yes,
Depends.
small s self, sort of ego. Yeah. Because on the upper level self, you are in that reverence, peace, and enlightenment, which kind of it's a neutral state. You choose. It's all choice. And so if you are at that self-actualized level, then you choose how you're gonna feel, no matter what the circumstances are. The idea here being that your state determines circumstances rather than circumstances determining your state.
Right.
And this is why someone like Bruce Lee, for example, he'd say, you know, nowadays we have all this like UFC. I'm a huge fan of UFC. Big fight coming up on 6th of October, whatever. East versus West, all that kind of stuff. And it's like now they have the categories of like 155 pound, 150 pound, 130 pound. And Bruce Lee used to say, it's just like, bring me any guy. Doesn't matter what size. It's just a fight to me.
Right.
So there's like state determines circumstances, you know, and
yeah.
So that's the idea.
He really is a good example of like, I really do think that you can focus on almost any line and use it as a vehicle for your growth all the way up the spiral. And if anyone is something like an integral martial artist, it's got to be Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee is the man.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Okay, so the third one, this is randomness of the universe that came up. It's a PHP algorithm of random from MySQL. Let's call that universe. So the next one that came out was Swami Sivananda, our good friend. Put your heart, mind, and soul into even your smallest acts. This is the secret of success.
I like that. I think this touches back on what we were saying about karma yoga. Like when I was saying, like, turn every action into your spiritual practice. That's basically what I hear him saying. And yeah, I think that's the way to go. I think that in some sense, you should always be on.
Okay.
Or yourself should always be off.
Okay. So I'll just one more bonus for the bonus round. I think this is potentially an interesting integral game to play in these live streams. So this one comes from this is from a guy who is closer to from where you were at, Henry Ford, our good friend. Givers have to set limits because takers rarely do.
Yeah, I like that. Now, this is for this Ford Motor Company guy?
Indeed.
He had another really good quote that I like, and he said something like, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses.
Yeah, that's actually not what he said. That's like it's a made up thing. But
okay.
It's often used in UX design as a research quote. It's like you don't ask people for what they want because they'll never tell you because they don't really know. And it actually relates to this kind of self-awareness and self-actualization. Do you really know what you want? And most of the time people are like, I don't know. I don't know.
So, good quote, poorly attributed.
Yeah. I'm not even sure that anyone said that, but it certainly wasn't Henry Ford, but it's attributed to Henry Ford, and then management consultants talk about it all the time as though it's like some sort of pinnacle of,
Read the other one again, though. Read the other one again. Let's have that one again.
So this is the one where he said, givers have to set limits because takers rarely do.
Yeah, and this actually ties back around well to the thing that we put a pin in. So that's nice.
Okay, so
I'm always trying to figure out how to work it back around.
All right, I just refreshed again, and although I said there was a bonus thing, and that's enough. But you know who came up? Your favorite guy, Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber came up with it, and he said, for altered states to become permanent states, some form of enduring development must take place.
Yeah. And that's like the subject of one stage becomes the object of the next. You know, this idea of if you practice it long enough, you'll be able to be in it and maintain it.
And just to clarify here, so altered states means when you kind of dip into a higher realm, but you can't sort of maintain it up there.
Right.
And it's like, oh, how did I get there? What did I do? Did I chew like these kind of Wrigley's chewing gums, or was it like Pepsi, then the mint, or
right? It's like what we were talking about before, like in the Harris-Peterson debates, where they would like get close to the integral and then resort back down to their yeah. It's like they have these kinds of like moments of like, oh. Yeah. They can't really hold it. They don't have the language for it. So, but they're getting there, slowly but surely.
Enjoying their comfort zones too much.
Yeah, but I do think that I like the idea of having to set your own boundaries, and I've kind of had to do this a little bit too, because there for a while, like. Part of my spiritual practice was like to always engage. It wasn't a matter of if I was going to say something, it was about when and how I was going to say something. Do you know what I mean? Like if I if I disagreed with you about something, and you know, sometimes you have to bracket certain aspects of the conversation, but for the most part, you know, if I found something that I thought I needed to go after, I'm gonna go after it eventually. At some point when the time is right, we're gonna talk about it.
Actually, so this is what we're going to wrap it up on. I think what is important for people to learn how to do, and this is a hugely tricky skill to know how to do, is, and you know, I'm saying this from a designer background, it took me a long time to learn how to do this, which is to critique, not criticize, but critique. And the critique is around thoughts, outcomes, creation, rather than criticize the person. You're an idiot, you're this, you're that, you don't get it, you're dumb, you're Eastern, you're Western, you're Muslim, you're Catholic, you're Christian, whatever, labeling and all that kind of stuff. So critique is an important skill to develop and to understand. And okay, so within this lower level truth, relative truth, there are bits and bobs that are worthwhile picking and unpicking and keeping and putting into the kitty of your integral life practice, continuous self-development, and discard the rest without getting hung up on it.
Yeah, and I think this is part of, like, you know, what I'm saying as a spiritual practice. Like this is the how element of what I'm talking about. So basically I'm saying there was a time in which it wasn't a matter of if I was going to talk to you about it. It was about how and when. So, you know, like I would think about how I was going to go about talking to you about this. But what I eventually learned is that I did need to kind of figure out who was going to be worth the investment of time and who wasn't. Because you only have so much time. You know, you only, and if you're constantly, you know, working on people and putting out all that kind of energy and effort, like, first of all, it can be too much, and it can mess up your character and the way that people see you if you're constantly, you know, critical like this, and especially in a direct, hard and fast kind of way. But also, it can be really draining. Could be draining, like, and this goes back to the thing I wanted to put a pin in. I think what I see a lot of people doing is, like, most people are like all social lines. They go to work, they come home, maybe they, you know, they do minimal amounts of things there, and they go hang out with their friends, right? So if you're all social lines all the time, okay, you're not working on your body lines, you're not working on your mental lines. What do you even bring to the social interaction? You haven't been studying, you haven't been working on your projects, you haven't been, you know, like, working on your body lines. You're not inspiring. These people are a drain. You know what I mean? Like, you go to hang out with these people and you spend the whole time being like, well, this is what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, I could never do that. You're like, yeah, you could do this. Like, all you need, you know, and so you spend, this is why I really, really like hanging out with people who are also inspired and passionate creators who have more balance, because when they're working on their body lines and their mental lines and they have their projects, when they do socialize, they bring a lot to the table, and it winds up being this inspiring kind of conversation where you light me up and I light you up, and we're like, yeah. That's where that's the best.
Absolutely. And there was a guy that there still is still alive, but he did a year's worth of tours around the world talking about growth hacking. And he did 365 talks around the world, and he delivered exactly the same talk every night over and over again. That's my definition of, like, self-punishment.
Yeah. Wow.
So but it
Man,
takes certain type
you
of
got really
discipline.
good at giving that talk, though.
I was like, man, like, because I went to one of his talks in London, and then 3 months later, I went to another one of his talks. I was like, it's the same talk. Like, what? That was like a complete waste of time.
Have you ever gone and seen a band, and they not only do they play the songs in the same order, but they have the same banter in between the songs? Have you ever seen this?
Oh my God,
One of their
I've
bands?
not. Luckily, I've not. No, no.
I have seen
And,
this.
you know, it's like Frank Zappa. Talking of that, like Frank Zappa used to tour the world, and he'd say to the band that he was working with, he'd say, "We're going to rehearse something like 70 songs. Okay, we're touring the world, and then every night, every evening, we're going to be performing 25, 30 songs out of that 70 song repertoire, and I choose on the night what we're playing." And you have to be so rehearsed in those 70 songs that when I go like so-and-so, you start playing straight away. That's it. And, you know, I choose based on what the crowd is like, what the feel is like, all these kind of things. And I'll choose throughout the concert, right? So I might think at the beginning, oh, I'm going to do these through at 30. But like after 7 songs, no, I'm going to do this one next. But you have to be 100% rehearsed on 70, and we'll perform 25 to 30 on the kind of random picking. And that way they would do, you know, world tour of 25 to 30 songs every time, but never the same concert. And that to me is, you know, integral way of performing.
Yeah. Have you played many shows?
I've played, actually. I had a group in London here which was performing Bosnian folk songs, and cool. Without knowing this thing about Frank Zappa, I had the same approach, which was like, hey, let's rehearse 20, 30 songs, and then depending on the length of the show, we'll perform 3, 4, 5, depending, you know, if we've got 5, 10 minutes slot or whatever. They ended up performing in Royal Opera House in London, which is a kind of miraculous in a sense, but you know, that happens when, you know, people play from the heart and soul and all these kind of things, which is a weird thing because, you know, people talk about soul music and so on, and, you know, these kind of folk songs. I'd realized, man, like I have got to reconnect with my ancestry in a way that's way deeper than what I ever thought. And I actually was struggling to sing these songs because I was singing them from the head, not even like they're sung from the soul. I understand this now fully, but not from the heart. And a lot of people sing them from the heart, but it's like you have to sing them from the soul, but you can't sing them from the soul unless you're connected with that. When I did Fresh Mind, then I went and did a performance with my mom. And just like in one night, one evening, it was like, I'm going to sing a cappella on my own, one song. And I was thinking, man, this is like the worst choice I've ever made, possibly. And I started singing, and everyone was like tuned in, and I was liking it, and they were liking it, and I'm like, now I get it. But it took me like 5 years of performance to get there. And then I realized, oh man, this was worth it for my own self, really, and then for other people to really connect with the content in the way that it's supposed to be delivered. But yeah, so that's a sort of short story.
That does take a lot of practice too. I mean, like, even to get to the point, at least for me, you know, where you're on the stage and all those people are there in front of you and you're trying to remember your lyrics and you're trying to, you know, like there's the performance itself can be a difficult task. And then there's a bunch of distractions, you know, like to be able to really get into that place within yourself to where you are able to like comfortably just like perform from your soul. That's a real skill. I feel like it takes a long time to get good at.
Yeah, but you know, I remember one time there was a situation where in the middle of the performance, because I was using this old accordion from Bosnia that was like already 25, 30 years old, and it was drying up, and when it dries up, all the kind of the keys start falling off because they've been stuck with glue, and that glue is dried off, and the kind of keys start falling off. And in the middle of the performance, one of the keys falls off, right? And I continue playing, and people laugh, and I laugh, and we continue singing and so on. And then I said at the end of that song, I said, look, this accordion is also a refugee from Bosnia. It's been through a lot. It's got a whole history to it. And now, you know, this is part of its history. And I'm going to continue playing with one key missing, because circumstances don't determine my state. It's just all perfection in that moment, and people really appreciated it. And so, you know, it's like you see people like Victor Wooten, who's a bass player, you know, just have they always have the kind of strings, you know, break off, and then he just kind of reorganizes his performance around the leftover strings, and it's like, it's fine.
Yeah.
So
doable.
Exactly. So all right, on that note, I would love to really appreciate you once again, from a very peaceful, reverent, and enlightened state, permanent state. I would like to think, at least feel and be, and, you know, love you in an integral way. It was really joyful conversation and lots of wisdom shared. So thank you very much. And let's do another one in time to come.
Yeah, thanks so much, brother. I really appreciate you having me. You know, I really enjoy these talks that we have, and I really like our dynamic, the way that we can kind of riff off of each other, but also kind of like pretty comfortably, you know, I don't want to necessarily
integrate.
Yeah, we can kind of debate and like ask each other questions about how we like. It's a beautiful thing, you know. Like I feel like our dynamic is really good.
I agree, and I really enjoy this. And maybe there's something can come off of this. You know, that's a bit of a more kind of broader, integral conversation podcast or stream of consciousness that we can put into the world more consistently. All right.
At the very least, I think we need to keep having these conversations and figure out each other's perspectives better. I think it's cool to have this kind of on the record parsing out and figuring out these different things. So
I
thank
agree.
you so much for offering this and inviting me. I really appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you for joining. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Peace.